Let me tell you something about how this country works. When the powerful make mistakes, when the wealthy gamble and lose, when corporations cut corners and systems fail, there's always someone who pays the price. And it's never the people who made the decisions. It's never the people who profited from those decisions. It's always the people who had no choice in the matter at all. It's always the poor. This isn't an accident. This isn't some unfortunate side effect of an otherwise functioning system. This is the design. This is how power protects itself. This is how wealth perpetuates itself. And this is why we're standing here today, because we refuse to accept that this is just the way things have to be. When Wall Street crashed the economy in 2008, who paid for it? Was it the executives who packaged toxic mortgages and sold them as sound investments? Was it the bankers who gambled with other people's money and lost? Was it the credit rating agencies that lied about the safety of these financial instruments? No. It was the single mother in Detroit who lost her home. It was the family in Phoenix that saw their life savings evaporated. It was the young person who graduated into a recession with debt and no job prospects. It was the worker who gave 30 years to a company only to see their pension fund disappear overnight. The people who created the crisis got bailouts, they got bonuses, they got to keep their jobs and their beach houses and their second homes in the Hamptons. The people who did nothing wrong, the people who played by the rules, the people who worked hard and saved and tried to build something for their families, they got evictions, they got unemployment. They got told to tighten their belts and work harder and stop asking for handouts. That's how injustice works in America. The costs flow downward, the profits flow upward. And we're all supposed to pretend this is merit. We're all supposed to pretend this is fair. Look at our healthcare system. We have people in this country right now rationing insulin. We have diabetics dying because they can't afford the medication they need to survive. Insulin costs about $10 to produce. It sells for $100 a vial in America. That margin, that markup, that profit is being extracted from people who have no choice but to pay it or die. And when they can't pay it, when they have to choose between insulin and rent, between medication and food, they're the ones who suffer. They're the ones who end up in emergency rooms with preventable complications. They're the ones who go blind, who lose limbs, who die decades before their time. And what happens to the pharmaceutical executives who set those prices? What happens to the insurance company administrators who deny coverage? What happens to the politicians who take their donations and take their profits? Nothing. They get more powerful, they get to stand in front of cameras and talk about innovation and market forces and personal responsibility, as if the market for life, saving medication is anything resembling free, as if there's anything responsible about forcing people to choose between health and bankruptcy. The cost of this injustice is measured in bodies. It's measured in preventable deaths and treatable conditions that become chronic and disabilities that could have been avoided. And every single one of those costs is paid by someone who couldn't afford to pay it, by someone who did everything right and still got crushed by a system that values profit over people. Think about our housing crisis. We have more empty homes in this country than we have homeless people. We have investment firms buying up entire neighborhoods, turning housing into a commodity, an asset class, a vehicle for wealth accumulation for people who already have more wealth than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. And what happens? Rents go up. People get priced out of communities they've lived in for generations. Families double up in apartments too small for them. People sleep in cars, in shelters, on the streets. Who pays the cost of this? Is it the hedge fund managers who see housing as just another number on a spreadsheet? Is it the developers who get tax breaks to build luxury condos that sit empty while people freeze on the sidewalk outside? Is it the politicians who zone away affordable housing and criminalize poverty? No. It's the family that loses their apartment because the rent went up $500 and they only make $12 an hour. It's the senior on fixed income who has to choose between housing and medication. It's the young person who works full-time and still can't afford a studio apartment in the city where they grew up. We're told this is supply and demand. We're told this is the free market working as intended. But there's nothing free about a market where one side needs shelter to survive and the other side is just looking for a return on investment. There's nothing free about a negotiation where one party will die without what the other party is selling. And when people can't afford housing and when they end up on the streets, we criminalize them for we pass laws against sleeping in public, against sitting on sidewalks, against existing in spaces where their existence might make comfortable people uncomfortable. We spend more money on police and sweeps and jail cells than it would cost to just house people in the first place. Because the cruelty is the point. Because if we acknowledge that homelessness is a policy choice, if we admitted that we have the resources to end it and simply choose not to, we'd have to confront what that says about us as a society. The criminal justice system is another machine that takes from the poor to feed the powerful. When a poor person commits a crime, even a minor one, they get the full weight of the system brought down on them. They get cash bail they can't afford, so they sit in jail before they've been convicted of anything, losing their job, losing their housing, losing custody of their kids. all while they're legally innocent. They get public defenders who are overworked and underfunded, carrying caseloads that make meaningful representation impossible. They get plea deals offered with the implicit threat that going to trial means risking decades in prison. So they plead guilty to things they didn't do just to get out, just to go home, just to survive, and then they have a record. And that record follows them everywhere. It makes it harder to get a job, harder to get housing, harder to get loans or start a business or build any kind of stable life. It makes them vulnerable to being sent back to prison for minor violations, for missing a meeting with a parole officer because they couldn't get time off work, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for existing in a society that has decided they are disposable. Meanwhile, when wealthy people commit crimes, when corporations break laws, when the powerful violate the rules, what happens? They get deferrals, they get settlements. They get fines that amount to a tiny percentage of the profits they made breaking the law in the first place, fines that they write off as a cost of doing business. They get to admit no wrongdoing while paying millions of dollars to make the case go away. They get to hire armies of lawyers and consultants and PR firms to manage their image and drag out proceedings until the public forgets and regulators give up. White-collar criminals, when they're convicted at all, go to minimum security facilities that look more like college campuses than prisons. They serve a fraction of their sentences. They get released early for good behavior and go right back to comfortable lives, often to positions of power and influence, sometimes to even greater wealth than they had before. The poor go to maximum security. They go to solitary confinement. They go to facilities where violence is routine and medical care is inadequate and mental health treatment is non-existent. They serve every day of their sentences and then some. They come out with nothing and less than nothing, with debt and trauma and barriers to every avenue of legitimate opportunity. This is injustice. This is a system designed to extract from those who have the least and protect those who have the most. And the cost is staggering. It's measured in lost potential, in families destroyed, in communities devastated, in generations locked into cycles of poverty, and incarceration that served no purpose except to maintain hierarchies of power. Look at our education system. We fund schools through property taxes, which means wealthy neighborhoods get well-funded schools with small class sizes and updated textbooks and music programs and sports teams and counselors and nurses and all the resources that help children thrive. Poor neighborhoods get overcrowded classrooms and outdated materials and buildings that are falling apart, and teachers who have to spend their own money on basic supplies. We tell poor kids to work hard and get an education, that it's their ticket to a better life. We give them schools that are set up to fail, schools that can't provide the support they need, schools that funnel them toward prisons rather than colleges. And then when they don't succeed in that system, when they fall behind or drop out or get caught up in the school to prison pipeline, we blame them. We call them lazy. We say they didn't want it badly enough. We say their parents didn't care. Their culture doesn't value education. They made bad choices. We never ask why a child's access to quality education should depend on how much money their parents have. We never ask why we're comfortable with a system that gives some children every advantage and other children barely enough to survive. We never ask what it says about us that we know exactly how to fix these schools. We know exactly what resources they need, and we simply choose not to provide them. And the cost of that injustice is paid by the kids who never got a fair shot. It's paid in dreams deferred, potential unrealized, and talents that never got the chance to develop. It's paid in lower lifetime earnings and worse health outcomes and shorter life expectancies. It's paid in communities that lose generation after generation to systems designed to fail them. Climate change is perhaps the starkest example of how the cost of injustice falls on the poor. The people who contributed the least to the crisis are the ones who will suffer the most from it. The wealthy can afford to move when their neighborhoods become unlivable. They can afford air conditioning when temperatures soar. They can afford to rebuild when disasters strike. They can afford food when droughts and floods disrupt supply chains. The poor can't. When a hurricane destroys a low-income neighborhood, those residents don't have savings to fall back on. They don't have second homes to move to. They don't have insurance that will cover the full cost of rebuilding. They become climate refugees, displaced from their homes, forced to start over with nothing in places that don't want them. When heat waves hit, poor people die at higher rates because they can't afford air conditioning, or they're afraid to run it because they can't afford the electric bill. When air quality deteriorates, poor people suffer more because they're more likely to have respiratory conditions and less likely to have access to health care to treat them. When food prices rise, poor people go hungry while the wealthy barely notice. And all of this suffering comes from a crisis created primarily by the wealthy and powerful, by corporations that knew for decades what their emissions were doing and chose profit over planet, by politicians who took fossil fuel money and denied the science, by a system that prioritized short-term gains for the few over long-term survival for the many. The cost of that injustice isn't some abstract future problem. It's being paid right now. In Puerto Rico, still recovering from hurricanes that were supercharged by warming oceans, in California, communities burned to the ground by climate-intensified wildfires, in Pacific Island nations being swallowed by rising seas, in African countries facing droughts and famines that displace millions. And here's what makes all of this even more obscene. We have solutions. We know how to fix these problems. We have the resources, the technology, the knowledge, the wealth to house every homeless person, to feed every hungry child, to provide health care to everyone who needs it, to educate every student, to transition to clean energy, to build a society where everyone has what they need to live with dignity. We choose not to. Not because we can't afford it, not because it's impossible, but because doing so would require redistributing power and wealth, would require the people who benefit from injustice to give up some of what they've taken, would require fundamentally changing systems that serve them very well even as they destroy everyone else. So instead we get told there's no money, we get told we have to be realistic, pragmatic, responsible, we get told that change has to be gradual, that we can't disrupt the economy, that we have to consider the concerns of stakeholders, which is just another way of saying we have to prioritize the interests of the wealthy over the needs of everyone else. We get means testing and pilot programs and studies and commissions and committees and endless debate about whether poor people deserve help, whether they'll spend it responsibly, whether it will make them lazy, whether they've earned it, whether they've proven themselves worthy of the bare minimum required for survival. Meanwhile, the wealthy get bailouts with no strings attached. They get tax cuts that cost trillions. They get subsidies and loopholes and incentives. They get business-friendly policies and job creator protections and regulatory relief. They never have to prove they deserve it. Their worth is assumed. Their needs are prioritized. Their demands are met. This is the fundamental injustice at the heart of our system. Not just that some have more than others, but that those who have the most pay the least cost when things go wrong, while those who have the least pay everything. When there's a pandemic, the wealthy work from home in comfortable houses. The poor stock shelves and deliver packages and care for the sick, exposing themselves to the virus because they can't afford not to work. And when they get sick, they have worse outcomes because they have underlying conditions that come from poverty, because they have less access to health care, because they live in overcrowded conditions where the virus spreads more easily. The wealthy got richer during the pandemic. The poor got poorer. The wealth gap grew even as millions of people died. We're supposed to think this is natural, inevitable, just unfortunate circumstances rather than policy choices that value some lives more than others. When police kill unarmed people, it's almost always poor people, almost always black and brown people from poor communities. The cost of a system built on violence and racism is paid by families who lose loved ones, by communities terrorized by the people who are supposed to protect them, by children who grow up traumatized, by generations who learn that their lives don't matter to people in power. And when there are calls for accountability, for reform, for reimagining what safety could look like if it wasn't rooted in violence, we're told we're being unrealistic. We're told crime will spike. We're told society will collapse, as if it hasn't already collapsed for the people who are dying, for the people who are locked in cages, for the people who live in fear every day. When workers organize for better conditions, for living wages, for the right to not be treated as disposable, they risk their jobs, they risk retaliation. They face union-busting campaigns funded by billions of dollars from corporations that would rather spend that money fighting their workers than paying them fairly. Workers who strike can lose their health care, can lose their homes, can be replaced and blacklisted. Meanwhile, the executives who suppress wages and cut benefits and offshore jobs face no consequences. They get bonuses for reducing labor costs. They get praise for efficiency and profitability. They get to lecture workers about the importance of sacrifice while they take home compensation packages that would take a worker multiple lifetimes to earn. The cost of economic injustice is paid by the worker who can't afford their rent even working full-time. It's paid by the person who has to choose between gas to get to work and food for their kids. It's paid by the parent who works 3 jobs and still barely scrapes, by who never sees their children except to tuck them in at night if they're not working the night shift too. It's paid in stress and exhaustion and health problems that come from overwork and poverty. It's paid in marriages that break under financial strain and dreams abandoned, because survival takes everything you have. In potential squandered because genius doesn't matter if you're born poor. And through all of this, we're told to be grateful. We're told things could be worse. We're told that poverty is motivation, that struggle builds character, that if you're not succeeding, it's because you're not trying hard enough. We're told to look at the few people who made it out as proof that the system works, ignoring the millions who work just as hard and stay trapped because the game is rigged. We're sold the lie that there's dignity in suffering, that there's nobility in poverty, that there's virtue in barely surviving while others swim in obscene excess. We're told that asking for more, demanding better, insisting that everyone deserves housing and healthcare and education and dignity is somehow entitled, is somehow asking for something we haven't earned. But here's the truth: injustice is expensive. It costs us all more than justice would It costs more to keep people in cages than to keep them in homes. It costs more to treat preventable diseases in emergency rooms than to provide preventive care. It costs more to have an undereducated population than to fund schools properly. It costs more to clean up after climate disasters than to prevent them. But those costs are diffused. They're spread across society. They're borne by the public while the profits are private. And the immediate visible costs fall most heavily on the people with the least power to change things, while the people with the most power have every incentive to keep things exactly as they are. That's why change is so hard. Not because we don't know what needs to be done, not because solutions don't exist, but because changing things would threaten the people who benefit from injustice, and those people have enormous power to resist change. They own the media companies that shape public opinion. They fund the politicians who write the laws. They employ the lobbyists who water down regulations. They hire the think tanks that produce studies justifying their wealth and opposing redistribution. They control the narrative about who deserves what and why things are the way they are. But their power isn't unlimited. It depends on the rest of us accepting their story, believing their lies, fighting each other instead of fighting them. It depends on us thinking that our interests are aligned with theirs, that what's good for them is good for us, that their success will somehow trickle down to us if we just wait long enough and work hard enough. It depends on us not recognizing that we have power too. That when we organize, when we mobilize, when we stand together and demand better, they have to listen, that their wealth, their power, their empires are all built on our labor, our consumption, our participation. And if we withdraw those things, if we refuse to accept the scraps they offer us, if we insist on justice, they can't stop us. Every right we have, every protection, every benefit was won by people who refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. It was won by people who organized and struck and marched and sat in and fought and sometimes died for the possibility of something better. It wasn't given. It was taken. It was demanded. It was won through struggle. And it can be won again. Housing for all can be won. Healthcare for all can be won. Good jobs with living wages and dignity can be won. An education system that serves all children equally can be won. A climate that can support human life can be won. A justice system that actually delivers justice can be won. A democracy that actually represents the people can be won, but only if we fight for it. But only if we refuse to let the cost of injustice keep falling on the people least able to bear it. Only if we insist that another world is possible and that we won't stop until we build it. Because here's what they don't want us to know: we're the majority. There are more of us than there are of them. There are more poor and working people than there are wealthy people. There are more people harmed by the current system than people who benefit from it. Our interests are aligned with each other, not with theirs. When we win, we all win. When they win, most of us lose. They know this. That's why they work so hard to divide us, to make us fight over scraps, to convince us that our enemy is the person who looks different, or speaks a different language, or worships differently, rather than the people who are hoarding resources while we all struggle. That's why they fund politicians who scapegoat immigrants and minorities, who blame poor people for their own poverty, who pit workers against each other, who tell us that the problem isn't that wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, but that someone else is taking what should be ours. But we're learning, slowly, painfully, at enormous cost, but we're learning. We're seeing through the lies. We're recognizing our common interests. We're building power. We're organizing. We're running for office and winning. We're striking and winning. We're striking and winning. We're protesting and winning. We're demanding change and making it happen. And every victory, no matter how small, changes what's possible. Every win builds momentum. Every fight we win makes the next fight easier. Every time we prove that another way is possible, we expand the imagination of what we can demand, what we can build, what we can become. The cost of injustice is paid by the poor, but the bill for that cost is going to come due, not in some far-off future, but not through revenge or destruction, but through transformation, through building systems that serve everyone, not just the wealthy, through recognizing that all of us deserve dignity, deserve security, deserve the chance to not just survive, but to thrive, through understanding that their abundance comes from our deprivation, that their wealth is our poverty, that their power is our powerlessness, and that we don't have to accept it, and that we don't have to keep paying the price for their greed and their cruelty and their indifference. We can build something better. We can create a world where everyone has health care, where everyone has housing, where everyone has enough. Not because of charity or generosity or kindness, but because it's our right. Because we're human beings and that should be enough. Because we live in the richest country in the history of the world, there's no excuse for anyone to go without. That world is possible. It's achievable. It's within our reach if we fight for it, if we refuse to give up, if we stand together and demand it. The only question is whether we will. Whether we'll keep accepting that the cost of injustice must be paid by the poor, or whether we'll finally say enough. Whether we'll keep letting the powerful escape accountability, or whether we'll hold them responsible. Whether we'll keep believing their lies or whether we'll trust what we can see with our own eyes, what we experience in our own lives, the cost of injustice is paid by the poor. But justice, when we win it, benefits us all. It makes all of us safer, healthier, freer, more secure. It unleashes the potential of millions of people who have been held back by systems designed to fail them. It creates the foundation for real prosperity, not just for a few, but for everyone. That's what we're fighting for. Not just relief from suffering, though that would be enough. Not just survival, though for many that's the immediate need. But transformation, liberation, a world rebuilt from the ground up to serve human needs rather than corporate profits, to prioritize people over property, to recognize that we all deserve to live full and dignified lives. They'll tell us it's impossible. They'll tell us we're dreamers, that we're naive, that we don't understand how the world works. But we understand perfectly well how the world works. We live it every day. We pay the price of it every day. And we know it doesn't have to be this way because we know it wasn't always this way, and we know that other countries do it differently, and we know that the only reason we can't is because the people in power don't want us to. But their wants don't matter more than our needs. Their comfort doesn't matter more than our survival. Their wealth doesn't matter more than our lives. And the sooner we all recognize that, the sooner we can start building the world we deserve, the world we've always deserved.